and they know it, and they like it. So ironically, these kids that are coming in that are excited aren't even of voting age, but they bring their parents with them. And if I ask their parents, I said, well, how did you get started? Well, my son made me look at your videos. So I find that very fascinating.
Could you just explicate? I'm Kai Mellner. I'm one of the editorial writers. What do you mean by your take on the Constitution or your beliefs in the Constitution? Could you go into that a little more?
I think most people realize that nobody takes seriously their oath of office. Matter of fact, they don't even take seriously their promises in their campaign. And everybody knows that I do, even if it requires me to vote by myself. And I vote by myself, sticking to those principles more so than everybody else put together. So I'm standing alone very often. And instead of that ever hurting in my district or hurting me in the campaign, people say, you know, he sticks by his guns. He does his very best to fulfill his promises. At the same time, they'll say, well, you know, there's stuff I don't agree with you on, but at least I can trust you. And it's that factor. And I think most people like us to believe in the Constitution. I mean, who's saying, well, let's throw it away. The First Amendment means nothing. But if you can ignore the mandate of the Constitution that says we can't go to war without declaring it, and the kids are very attracted to that principle, you don't go to war without declaring it. They also might say, well, maybe they'll protect my personal privacy. And they want somebody to stand up for those things that they see as being very, very good. The Constitution is written to restrain the government, not to restrain the people.
You supported a couple that doesn't pay income taxes. Do you think that people have to pay income taxes?
How do you preface that question again?
You supported a couple that doesn't want to pay its income taxes.
I don't know if that's exactly correct.
Explain it to me,
because there was a couple who's having a problem with the IRS, and I have never met him, and I don't even know the details of the case. What I do support is a very, very strong position that the income tax is a vicious tax that I want to get rid of and repeal the 16th Amendment. We don't need it. We live for most of our history without an income tax, and you know that whole story. If we didn't have a war going on and doing the things we shouldn't do, we don't need an income tax. So that's my position. But I'm also a strong believer in peaceful resistance. And I believe in the process of Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Lysander Spooner, who practices civil disobedient, nonviolent. And so therefore, but there are protesters in the tax movement that end up being confronted and exert violence. And the three I cited totally reject violence. But I think when laws are bad and you practice civil disobedience, you have to accept the consequence. I, for instance, don't like those kind of things, but I've chosen to get involved in politics and bring about changes in a more deliberate fashion by changing the law and running for office.
What would you replace the income tax with?
I wouldn't replace it. I'd just get rid of it. But I'd reduce spending. I could save $400 billion in the military budget out of 1 year's budget. We don't need to police the world.
What would government look like without income tax?
Well, like it did before 1913. I mean, the government would be very less involved. They wouldn't be pretending that they can run your life. They wouldn't have people spying on you and having big bureaucracies, and the federal government would be out of the affairs of most of the things that we do. And right now, if you add up everything that we spend to manage our empire, it's close to $1 trillion a year. So it would look much smaller. The military-industrial complex would be smaller. We wouldn't be kowtowing to the medical-industrial complex, where the drug companies and the drug hospital management companies run the show and spend hundreds of millions of dollars lobbying us. I would get rid of all that, and you'd spend a lot less money.
Are there also some basic services that Americans have become accustomed to, either in terms of highways, in terms of, you name it, that would have to go away as well? I mean,
well, that's not what I'm campaigning on, but there's truly theoretical alternatives to that. But you could use the example of a service that people have become very dependent on, say, taking care of the elderly. My philosophy protects the elderly better than anybody else. I've never voted to spend one penny out of the Social Security fund, and not many people can say that. So the fund would be there.
You would maintain a Social Security payroll tax?
No, I'd modify that. But I would maintain the commitment that they're expecting, because to turn it off wouldn't work politically, and it just is not a wise move to do it. But the only way you can do this is turn it off gradually, have a transition program. I'd allow the young people to get out. and quit paying their taxes on Social Security, but they'd have to face up to their own obligations. And most young people are delighted to hear that because they know they're not going to get anything out of it. We're not going to meet their commitment, and they know we're lying to them. And people rally to that. So I would let them get out, and then all of a sudden, yeah, where's the money going to come from? But you can save hundreds of billions of dollars by merely having a constitutional foreign policy and give up on maintaining our world empire, and you could tide people over. You don't have to. Right now, where are they attacking the budget? On some of the benefits that these people have become dependent on. So although that might not fit my idealistic image of what government should be like, but, idealism is good to have it as a goal, but you can't impose that, with the click of a switch. I want a different monetary policy, but I don't advocate closing down the Federal Reserve. I want to change things where you can bring sense to our monetary policy and to our retirement policies. And by not ever spending any money out of the retirement system, Social Security, saving money elsewhere, and allowing young people to get out of it sounds pretty logical to me.
So I'm not sure I entirely understand what you're saying. You're saying that 30 years down the pike here, you see that the U.S. government would not provide any sort of entitlements that have to do with retirement?
Well, that would depend on what the people want, but I would allow the young people to move in that direction, both, whether it's their retirement programs or whether it's their medical programs. I mean, there's lots of alternatives for people to get insurance, and pay for their own bills and work into a transitional system by giving tax credits and other things. So there's a lot of transitional programs, but for me to say, I could say that as a political philosopher and predict something or say what is ideal, but as a candidate, I'm not in that business at the moment. I'm in the business of what do we do today? Do we have problems? What are the problems and what are the solutions? Are they practical? Aren't they practical? And I would say in 30 years from now, the people 30 years from now have to decide. I can't, make those decisions.
So if you allowed the young people to opt out, now you've sort of made that decision
Sure.
for the future.
But that means maybe some don't opt out, so it's not closed down.
Since you did mention healthcare, or at least as a function of government, what is your belief on whether the government should be funding healthcare?
Well, governments can't fund anything. They don't have any money. They have to take money from one group and give it to another, or they have to borrow the money, which is makes the government indebted, or they print the money, which causes the inflation that hurts the poor people that you're trying to help. So when the government gets involved, you make the product scarce and you make the costs go up. And you make the doctors unhappy, then the patients miserable, and the HMOs in charge. So the directions has been disastrous. And so what you do is you move in the other direction. You offer an opportunity for individuals to set $3,000 a year aside, get it off their taxes, they get all their money back, and then they spend it the way they want. They get a major medical policy, but they negotiate with the doctor. They go and see the doctor and pay the bills like it used to be. There's nothing better to maintain control on costs than a doctor-patient relationship. But once you get third parties, whether it's insurance companies are in bed with the government or the government, every patient gets charged the maximum. And when I started medicine, every patient was charged the minimum. And there was a lot of charity, and nobody was ever turned away, and nobody was in the streets without medical care. Now we have costs skyrocketing, and there's a shortage of medical care. And that is a predictable consequence of an interventionist economic policy in medicine.
I was curious, since you mentioned medicine and the government, sort of what your take was on the Surgeon General's, the former Surgeon Generals, all their testimony last week.
On former Secretary...
Surgeon Generals. The three Surgeon Generals who were testifying.
And what was the precise testimony that you want me to comment on?
They were talking about executive interference in their ability to do their jobs. There was Reagan's former Surgeon General and...
Executive, you mean the executive branch of government interfering in the practice of medicine? Or... Well, the general statement, I don't know how precise this answer can be, but in general, I don't think the executive branch should be interfering in your personal life or in your personal economic life. That should be done by free choices. And so, therefore, the government should be opting out.